Russians too. Ha! I was gambling in Havana. I took a little risk. And lawyers, guns, and money. Get me out of this. How? I'm the innocent bystander. Somehow I got stuck between the rock and a hard place. And I'm down on my luck. Yes, I'm down on my luck. Well, I'm down on my luck. And I'm hiding in Honduras. I'm a desperate man. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Oh, the shit has hit the fan. Hey! Send lawyers, guns, and money. Oh, yeah! Send lawyers, guns, and money. Send lawyers, guns, and money. Hey! Send lawyers, guns, and money.
All right. Let's see. I want to start out with a video that was. Let me minimize myself a little bit here. Move myself out of the way. I was talking to Jared the other day, or no, it was today, and he was suggesting Albert Pike. Hello. And he was talking about how he said there was a plan for 3 world wars, and this was written in the 1850s, which is about the time that they started concocting the idea for the creation of Israel, and when they started starting that whole terrorism to drive people out. How does my mic sound? Does it sound okay? I changed some settings. we're not going to do the femdom lady. Not everybody enjoys hating her as much as I do. And not going to do any more trannies tonight. But who knows? The world's wacky. But I had a couple of things. I was listening to something today about the South Africa, and there was something that really struck me at the end of this documentary that I was watching, and it was something the woman said that really like gave away the little game that they were playing and why they took down South Africa. And it's the same channel that I've been finding a bunch of videos on Rhodesia / Zimbabwe. And there's a lot of pretty interesting stuff on there. I don't know why I'm getting suggested it. It's probably the people that I'm following or following me. But nonetheless, it's pretty interesting. But I wanted to start out with this video about Albert Pike and his plans for 3 world wars.
I'm J.R. Church. Welcome to today's analysis of the news. Albert Pike was one of the most colorful characters in American history. It is said that he was born on December 29, 1809 in Boston, was the eldest son of 6 children born to Benjamin and Sarah Andrew Pike. He studied at Harvard and later served as Brigadier General of the Confederate Army. After the Civil War, Pike was found guilty of treason and jailed, only to be pardoned by President Andrew Jackson on April 2, 1866, who met with him the next day at the White House. On June 20th, 1867, Scottish Rite officials conferred upon Johnson 32nd degree Freemasonry degrees. Pike was said to be a genius, able to read and write 16 languages. He was one of the founding fathers of the head of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, being the Grand Commander of North America Freemasonry from 1859, and retained that position until his death in 1891. In 1869, he was the top leader of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Pike was said to be a Satanist who indulged in the occult, and he apparently possessed a bracelet which he used to summon Lucifer, with whom he had constant communication. He was the Grand Master of a Luciferian group known as the Order of the Palladium, or of Sovereign Council of Wisdom, it's also been called, which had been founded in Paris in 1737. Now, General Albert Pike was the only Confederate general with a statue on federal property in Washington, D.C. He was honored not as a commander or even as a lawyer, but as Southern Regional Leader of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The statue stands on a pedestal near the foot of Capitol Hill between the Department of Labor building and the Municipal building between 3rd and 4th Streets on D Street Northwest. Now, I tell you all of this because it is said that he received a vision from his mentor, Mr. Lucifer, I guess, on August 15th, 1871. And William Guy Carr, former intelligence officer in the Royal Canadian Navy, wrote a book called Satan, Prince of this World, in which he gives this information. He said that he received this information from a book written by Cardinal Caro Rodriguez in Santiago, Chile, who wrote in 1925 a book called The Mystery of Freemasonry Unveiled. And in this book, in 1925, it is said that he wrote a letter to a man named Mazzini in which he described this dream. And in the dream, he predicted 3 world wars. The First World War, he said, must be brought about, and I'm quoting from Albert Pike. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and German empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions.
I have a feeling that that wasn't just a vision. I think that was a meeting of the minds, that your consciousness was kind of just escaping.
Now, students of history will know that Otto von Bismarck forged certain alliances between 1871 and 1898, which brought about this war, this World War I. And Otto von Bismarck here says that he was a co-conspirator with Albert Pike, and he was the one instrumental in bringing about the First World War. Well, that's the First World War. Then he dreams that there must be, he is given in this visionary dream, a Second World War. Now remember, this was in 1925 that it became public in this book written by a cardinal from Santiago, Chile, Rodriguez. He says, quote, the Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences. But
It's interesting too that the down in South America, they actually have a thing called the Black Pope. It's not like a pope that's in blackface. They have like the Jesuit order, and their pope is the Black Pope.
Between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, and that the political Zionism will be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. Well, there are some who may argue that the terms Nazism and Zionism were not known in 1871. You should remember, however, that the Illuminati invented both of these movements. In addition, communism as an ideology and as a coined phrase originates in France during the Revolution. In 1785, Restif coined the phrase 4 years before the Revolution broke out. Restif and Babeuf.
Nazism was a term that was like kind of a slur against them. I forgot who came up with the term Nazi, but it was more so a slur against them.
In turn, were influenced by Rosé, as was the most famous conspirator of them all, Adam Weishaupt. Then he has this vision, in this vision, not only one world war and two world wars, but here comes the Third World War. He says, and I quote, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. Yeah, that's what he says. The war, this was 1925. Please understand that. At least 1925. May go all the way back to 1871, as is purported to do, but at least it was written in a book and published in 1925. So he says, after World War I was just over a few years, and before World War II even started, he's now thinking about this Third World War, and it says that it will be caused by the differences between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. That's what it says. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm in which
Palestine was basically a mixed area. Like all the different religions came over there. and existed, and kind of just did their practices and their worship. There's some good video from like the early 1900s or late 1800s of people walking around there and just visiting the holy sites and praying and really just cohabitating pretty well together.
In all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin and savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. So he's against Christianity and he's against atheism. They're supposed to fight each other to the death, you see. Then, he says, everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowledge where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. That's what he says. Brought finally out in the public view. So he's saying that Lucifer will finally make himself, the good guy. He's going to save the world from these atheists who don't believe in deity and from these Christians who believe in the good God. Well, so it says, this manifestation will result in the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated.
I feel like the Chinese and Russia are not the only countries that play the long game and have 100-year plus long plans.
At the same time. Well, I don't know if it's true, but I can tell you that it sure has played into what is being carried on in the Middle East today. And it looks like everything from World War I and World War II, with the development of the State of Israel, and with the Zionist movement and the Communist movement and the atheist movement, and the peppering down of persecution on the Christians of this world, it looks like that may be Lucifer's attempt at annihilation of us all.
I heard something crazy today that was pretty confounding. Is the people that invaded Syria recently and were slaughtering Christians were killing less women and children than at a less percentage than the Israelis that are doing it today.
So that Lucifer will appear in the form, of course, of what the Bible calls the Antichrist, and establish peace on earth for mankind. I got news for all those Illuminatists. Their little plan will only last for 3.5 years and will be destroyed by the second coming of Jesus Christ himself, who, by the way, is going to take all of us Christians out of this world before the 7 years sets in, before this Luciferian ideal can capture the imaginations of people on planet Earth. There won't be a fight between Christianity and atheism, because we will be gone. But the atheists, they might meet their demise at the hands of the Antichrist when he introduces Lucifer, his old pal. I can tell you this, they're all going to be thrown into the lake of fire. So says the Word of God, and I believe it from cover to cover. I'm J.R. Church. We'll see you again tomorrow with our analysis of the news.
And this right here is
15 years later, the cinema is taking its first steps.
video of
Cameramen
what
employed by the
Palestine
Lumiere
used to look
brothers
like.
filming at Jerusalem Station provide the first moving pictures taken in Palestine. From now on, the camera is a recording eye, and what it records is this: a society much like that of Cairo, Damascus or Beirut, in an Arab city much like any other. By the end of the 19th century, Palestine has 500,000 inhabitants, of whom 30,000 live in Jerusalem. A veiled woman, a Sunni Muslim, one of the majority. An Orthodox Jew. He too turns away from the camera. Here we have an Armenian Pope. Each of the Christian denominations has its church here in the Holy City. The holy places of the three religions are scattered across a few hundred square meters. The Great Mosque is close to Christ's tomb. Further along, at the foot of the Wailing Wall, a Jew is reciting a prayer. He is wearing a Turkish tabush, and though he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Jews form half the population of Jerusalem, but in the country as a whole, they make up less than 5% of the total. Christians account for 10% and Muslims 85%. All of them are subjects of the Sultan of Constantinople. There are no frontiers in the Ottoman Empire. There are administrative divisions in which, in this immense territory, Palestine occupies a mere 27,000 square kilometers, made up of 3 small districts in the south of the province of Damascus. The same empire in the 17th century. In the meantime, it has lost the Balkans, France and Italy have seized North Africa. England has moved into Egypt, Aden, and even Kuwait.
So now I wanted to watch this economic war video of South Africa because it's kind of telling of a repeating pattern of what keeps happening in countries that want to establish themselves too much.
Troops from Zimbabwe on patrol in Mozambique. The frontline states are in peril. Their economic arteries under threat from sabotage by South Africa. Tonight, This Week examines the price of sanctions in the corridor of power. Good evening. Over the last few months, it's become ever more clear that the frontline states in southern Africa really are in the firing line. Nations like Zimbabwe and Mozambique have committed themselves to sanctions against apartheid, but today their very survival as independent states is dependent upon South Africa. In its starkest form, this basic fact raises the question, how do they assist the destruction of apartheid without destroying themselves? In Corridor of Power, Trevor Phillips reports from two nations in jeopardy.
Sunset on Beira Beach. Once this was Mozambique's Indian Ocean playground for the rich. Today, refugees squat in abandoned hotels. The city has no water supply, no shops, no buses, no medicines. Meat and petrol are rarities. Beira is just one victim of a calculated campaign by South Africa. Its object, to humble its black neighbours. Its weapons, sabotage and economic chaos.
South Africa has been in a program of destabilization of neighboring countries for years. Between 1980 and 1984 alone, in the earlier part of the period, the cost of that destabilization was something like $10 billion. 1/3 of the total export earnings of all of those 9 countries. So this is a massive program designed to keep those countries in a position of economic and, of course,
Sounds a lot like what's happening to Russia.
Political dependence.
And again, what happened to South Africa a second time recently.
On South Africa.
We are suffering, and we are suffering a lot already, without a single measure of sanctions being imposed against South Africa. If you tell me that the blasting of sleeping Botswana in the middle of the night is not suffering, the blowing up of railways and roads, the burning of oil terminals and blowing up of oil refineries, the fostering of bandits who are cutting people's ears and people's noses, burning schools and clinics and hospitals, shutting up rural stores, as you saw in Beira, is not suffering, then I don't know what is suffering.
This is Southern Africa's economic battleground. With few roads and vast distances to cover, most trade in this region has been rail-borne for nearly 100 years. In colonial days, goods bound for Europe travelled via the most convenient coastal port. Landlocked Zimbabwe and Zambia tended to use Mozambique, but in the past 10 years, their trade has been deliberately channeled into South Africa's ports. In part, they've been tempted there by the carrot of cheap rates on South Africa's freight trains, but they've also been chased south by her military stick. South Africa's neighbours were all friendly British or Portuguese colonies until the 1960s. By 1980, independence movements had created a bloc of 9 hostile African states. To neutralise this political threat, Pretoria played the transport card. In a series of sabotage raids, South African-backed forces destroyed every non-South African rail route to the sea, except those too long or too dangerous to use. The 6:30 a.m. goods train from Messina in South Africa to Beit Bridge in Zimbabwe. The trains that cross this bridge carry more than 3/4 of all Zimbabwe's trade with the outside world. Beit Bridge is by far and away the country's most important trading link, and it's kept open only if the South Africans want it open. It's not just the scale of this trade that matters to Zimbabwe. The 630s carrying lubricants for the country's tractors.
So they're calling it Zimbabwe now. So this is past the end of Rhodesia.
Chemicals for its soil, machine parts for its factories. Without them, Zimbabwe's economy will grind to a standstill within days. Zimbabwe has to pay $25 million each year to its bitterest enemy just to keep this traffic going. And the country's leaders know that South Africa has their economy by the throat.
At any time, they can strangle us. I can give an example. When the 10 round of trains between us and South Africa was once at 13 days, and then they increased it to 18 days. They increased to 40 days. But after some discussions with them, they have now reduced down to 18 to 20 days. But under Smith, it was 13. So you can see that it is necessary for us to move away from that situation where, by the stroke of a pen, they can lengthen the 10 round of trains.
And how did that work out?
Imports, Zimbabwe has to sell its products abroad, and those exports are just as vulnerable. 6 of Zimbabwe's main export products depend on South African ports to get to their market. Grain exports earn upwards of $40 million a year. Sugar, steel, minerals and meat bring in another $400 million. Cotton is worth more than $100 million each year. Between them, they account for 2/3 of the country's export sales. That means that 2 out of every $3 of foreign currency earned by Zimbabwe depends on South African goodwill. Exports of meat to Europe are especially vulnerable. A delay in dispatch can lead to huge refrigeration costs. Even worse, a hold-up on the line can mean that a whole shipment perishes. The industry's bosses understand the costs of a confrontation with South Africa only too well.
I think we would see massive unemployment. Major industries would virtually come to a halt. Export earnings would fall fairly dramatically and quickly. Even institutions such as the railways would find it difficult to operate because of a shortage of essential lubricants. and products which we don't produce ourselves and which we currently import either from South Africa or through South Africa. Coking coal, for example, for the refining of ferrochrome.
How about there?
For Zimbabwe's businessmen, the search for new routes to the sea is now the #1 priority.
For us, as business people in Southern Africa who are here to stay, and we are Africans, it's not an option. It's absolutely critical. Especially, I think, when you take a long-term perspective on the South African situation, because there's not...
All right, hold on a second. So this is a map right here. You're in Zimbabwe. The ocean is right there. Major ports go through up the Nile River. Why are you sending all your shit down into South Africa? Why don't you just create your own fucking railroad?
Not going to be substantive change in the South African crisis for many years to come. And while South Africa is going through this metamorphosis, we have to survive. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're making sure of it.
This is the alternative. The rail line from Mutare in eastern Zimbabwe down to Beira. It's Zimbabwe's quickest and cheapest route to the coast. Less than 200 miles to the east of here lies the Mozambican port of Beira. If the frontline states want to break through South Africa's domination of the transport system, it'll be through this valley behind me. They regard it as their gateway to economic liberation. But the question is, can they make it work?
I'm going to answer that and say no. They cannot get it to work.
The Beira line isn't a new route. Built by Cecil Rhodes in the 1890s, it once carried more than half of Rhodesia's trade. But since 1975, when Mozambique closed its borders to Ian Smith's rebel colony, there's been little traffic. Under Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe has gone all out to reopen the line. Its backers say that charges would be half those on the South African routes. But the railway isn't the only important part of the corridor. Alongside runs a road used by service and military vehicles. And below the soil is a vast oil pipeline, pumping 50,000 barrels of petrol and diesel per day, 95% of Zimbabwe's entire fuel consumption. With so much at stake, it's not surprising that the Zimbabweans are prepared to defend the corridor in numbers. Mozambique's national army, the FPLM, proved incapable of preventing 5 successive major attacks on the pipeline in 1984 and 85. So in July last year, the Zimbabweans took over.
Wait, so this doesn't make sense. If the whole thing was about racism, and yes, they could use their helicopters. If the whole thing was about race and equality, then they would have been able to just get along with their fellow black man to their neighbor in the east. Why were they hesitant to work with you?
They moved in up to 12,000 troops, highly trained and well equipped. Above all, they were experienced in guerrilla warfare. They've kept the corridor open, but in spite of this huge commitment of forces, it's still not risk-free. In the past month alone, explosions have halted rail traffic twice. And even the presence of armed guards on top of and inside the wagons hasn't kept the trains running on time. Earlier this year, the destruction of this bridge on the Pongwe River made the road impassable until engineers could put up a temporary crossing. In August last year, their headquarters at Gorongosa were overrun by the Zimbabweans. These diaries reveal the depth of South Africa's support. The MNR was promised arms and training by South Africa's military leaders. The object, to bring economic chaos to Mozambique. This cement factory near Beira was part of an industry that earned Mozambique $5 million a year. The MNR destroyed the rail link to its quarry. Today, Mozambique imports cement. Where from? South Africa.
Power lines, railways, bridges, systematically attacked and destroyed, weakened, so as to turn the traffic through South African routes and enlarge the dependency. So it has to be a very important part of the immediate need. And it is a great humanitarian need. It's not part of a fight against South Africa. It's a part of helping the basic needs of the people of those frontline states, of Zimbabwe, of Zambia, of Mozambique, perhaps most of all, to sustain, most of those countries other than Mozambique are landlocked, to sustain an outlet to the sea. In this case, through Mozambique. So the Beira corridor, the Beira port itself, are all part of what should be a major international effort to secure these important transportation links.
When I was a journalist in Maputo in 1983, the South Africans did an air raid of Maputo. And it was clearly a surgical demonstration raid. They attacked a jam factory. And they strafed the jam factory, they strafed the creche at the jam factory, they killed workers coming to work in the jam factory. They said it was an ANC terrorist base, but I arrived there literally while the bodies were still on the ground, and all that you could see were grapefruits and tins of jam. This wasn't an ANC terrorist base. They were attacking a jam factory to demonstrate to the Mozambicans the power they had. About 3 streets away from the jam factory, they attacked the house of the head of the state advertising agency. And it was like target practice. The planes came in low over the trees and just with rockets attacked the back of the house, blew away the entire back of the house and then went up again. All they were doing was a kind of target practice to say to Mozambican civilians, we can get you if we want to get you.
Commercial transport.
Okay, so if they did all of that, then why are they still preventing the Zimbabwean people from going and joining forces or fighting against them? That doesn't add up.
Atari, one of the few trucking companies still prepared to risk the road to Beira. Don Howard, the owner, is carrying medicines and food to the besieged town.
We have had 1 or 2 incidents in the last 2 months. One vehicle detonated a landmine with the rear end of the vehicle. We can't tell who are causing problems along the road. The risk is always there on any road.
Howard can't get his vehicles insured for the route, but he insists on going because he believes that the future of his business depends on keeping the road to Beira open. This is what he's pinned his hopes on, Beira Port. Back in the 50s, Beira handled more than half of Zimbabwe's exports. When the border was closed, it lost that business. But it's slowly coming back to life. European governments and private companies have put more than $300 million into rebuilding, and they've sent their own engineers to get the job done. The port's capacity is up to 1 million tons, and its backers predict that inside 3 years it will be able to ship as much as the frontline states can send. But there's still a long way to go.
Maybe not the best idea to do with combustible gas.
Beira itself is a town under siege. It's been cut off from the surrounding countryside by the MNR. There's no water supply and no power in the city. No shops are open because there's precious little to sell. In fact, money has little meaning here. Beira has gone back to the barter system. the MNR haven't gone away, and the squeeze on Beira continues. Graham Evans is a British engineer working for BP. He's been here since 1984.
We've been without water now 6 days. It started last Tuesday, it's now Sunday.
And what is the problem?
Is that Adam Friedland's dad?
The problem, they tell us, is that the pumps are broken down at a place called Matua, 40 kilometres up the road. They're trying to repair that. They're trying to bring in generators. We've shipped some generators up there with a crane, which happens to be working for us. They might get that repaired next week.
Electricity, how long have you been without that in Beira?
86 days now. It went off on the 25th of August. They originally cut the power on the 11th of August, and that was off for 8 days. They managed to re-establish the lines. The lines were blown up. And then on the 25th, they were blown up again. Only this time, apparently, the bandits also cut the power cables. Very difficult to repair. They haven't been repaired since.
A water queue, the most common sight in Beira. Unless you can manage to collect rainwater in a roof tank, you can't afford to waste water here by washing in it. And the stench of
If only Mr. Beast was there.
untreated sewage and rotting garbage follows you through the streets. Fruits and vegetables grow in rich profusion, but no one can buy them. The average weekly wage will get you just 2 cabbages. And to buy $1 American, you need a bucketful of Mozambican meticals.
Mozambique is the front line of the frontline states. That is where the first act of protection and security must take place.
So if those countries requested it, you would support the idea of military aid from other countries?
Yes, I think so. Already, but you know, we passed that. Zimbabwe is already engaged, inevitably, militarily, in helping to protect that Beira corridor. It has to be, because it's its lifeline.
Do you see any prospects of military help from other countries, let's say India, for example?
Well, I think all of that must be possible. Much of it must depend on what the frontline states themselves want.
Wouldn't there be a case, as the Commonwealth Secretary General, Mr. Ramphel, says, for international help of a practical kind, by which he means troops?
Well, let me make it absolutely clear. Any incursion by the South African Defence Forces into Mozambique, Zimbabwe, or any of the other frontline states is totally and utterly unacceptable. And I'm quite sure that world opinion will combine, under such a circumstance, to take the most appropriate action in the circumstances. But I'm not prepared to speculate as to what that will be. I'm sincerely hoping that somehow we're going to knock some more sense into the South African government to stop these incursions onto frontline state territory.
With the example of Mozambique before their eyes, the frontline leaders are sceptical about a change of heart in Pretoria. At last summer's Commonwealth mini-summit, they chose a different, more risky road to try to bring about the fall of the apartheid system itself with an international campaign of sanctions.
The South African government is fighting its own people. And we must not be seen as the major protagonist or antagonist in the apartheid battle. It is a battle between a regime which is illogical, irrational, and racialist against its own people. And we just happen to be the pawns, the unfortunate victims of a regime which is running away from its own self-made problems at home and looking for scapegoats outside.
But you are prepared to take the consequences of a sanctions battle?
What is the alternative? To live under perpetual domination? Under perpetual bandit activities, with our populations being subjected to victimization, humiliation, and torture? There's no alternative.
But Linda Chalker knows that to work, a sanctions policy would have to involve South Africa's largest trading partner, Britain. Would we join the campaign?
Trevor, I must ask you to look at what has happened.
If I remember correctly, sanctions did not work out too well and exacerbated the problem quite badly, and only hurt, every time they do sanctions anywhere, it only hurts the native population. as if you expect them to go and revolt, especially in their weakest state.
Even with the limited sanctions which are in place in South Africa in the last 4 months, the South African government has built itself into a lager situation. It is seeking to do far more negative things in the line of apartheid because it has literally fenced itself round. It is making itself even more self-sufficient, and it is being even...
That's the line that I wanted to get to, was that right there. Let's re-listen to that.
It is making itself even more self-sufficient.
And that's why it had to go.
And it is being even less open-minded towards black South Africans. More sanctions would make that even worse. And one of the reasons I'm quite certain that the frontline states have not yet taken all the measures to which they committed themselves back in August is because they've realised how desperate this would be in many areas for them. They may still take those sanctions, and I don't presume to say they should not. But I do not believe the West, by taking general economic sanctions, will do anything to advance the cause of black South Africans.
If sanctions are imposed, this may shorten the time between this suffering and the independence of South Africa, the majority in South Africa. But Margaret Thatcher would want us to continue suffering quietly.
Will you implement sanctions against South Africa?
Our Prime Minister is an honest man. What he says, he does.
And what is your plan now, given the list of sanctions drawn up by the Commonwealth?
That's literally every single civil war. That's how we ended up in civil war, was the fucking tariffs. This shit is always being used to propagate some group that's in control.
Summer and so on. What are you planning to do?
We are waiting for the signal and we implement.
But who are you waiting for?
The signal from the Commonwealth.
Every day that the frontline states wait, their dilemma deepens. They could try to go ahead with a sanctions campaign, but the costs, human and economic, would be fearful. And without Britain's backing, they'd be unlikely to succeed. But if they fail to carry out their threats, their credibility will suffer, and they'll be sending a clear message to Pretoria. That in Southern Africa, for the moment at least, apartheid calls the shots.
Trevor Phillips reporting from the turmoil in Southern Africa.
As soon as I heard that line today when I was at work, they're working towards being more self-sufficient. Anytime that you start doing that, you, oh man, there's a line somewhere in the beginning of a song of a quote by Michael Parenti I'll have to find that really explains that stuff really well. What was the other thing? Kind of want to actually keep going with the videos on Rhodesia. There was one that I was listening to earlier today because this stuff is really interesting to me. It really shows you how things play out. Where is that? That's the economic war. That's the business. Blah blah blah. Yeah, this is the one I was starting to listen to, and this was in 1960s. I believe. I think it was this one, unless I was listening to one earlier. No, it was this way. This one. Is that?
But Mugabe's promise, the change
stupid ass Mugabe.
There was a time when the only way the Rhodesian Air Force would have carried Robert Mugabe was bound and handcuffed to the floor. Today, the same white pilots fly for the Zimbabwe Air Force, and the man they carry is now called Prime Minister. In the war that ended last year, this was guerrilla country, the heartland of Mugabe's support. For Mugabe, this place has a personal significance. It was here that he fled in 1975 on his...
Look at the way that they treat him like he's Nelson Mandela. That same shit where they, like, Nelson Mandela was in fucking prison for a reason. Don't, like, pretend that he was a great man. all these people that they prop up as figures are such fucking monsters. Whether it's Mandela to George Floyd to any of these martyrs that they make, like, what was that? Jared, what was that lady's name? The one in India, was it, what was her name? The one that was the Catholic.
His way to lead the war from Mozambique. Greeting him today are many of the people who hid him from the White Army and helped smuggle him across the border. With him too is one of his most trusted wartime followers, Maurice Nyagumbo. The poor farmers of this village.
That's right, Mother Teresa, the one that was pictured with Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father.
Have not yet witnessed the sweeping revolution that Mugabe once promised, but their commitment to him is total. Mugabe spoke to them about the shared suffering of the past.
I felt very emotional about it. There I was, getting back to the spot whence I began the journey to Mozambique. I was completing, as it were, a cycle, which started with my going on a campaign to organize a struggle against the regime, and now was ending with my return after a triumph. It was therefore a kind of triumphant march, concluding the war, as it were.
The revolutionary leaders from the war are now MPs in a kind of African Westminster. For a year now, the public debates in this chamber have been a symbol of Robert Mugabe's promise that change will be gradual, that reconciliation is his aim. Reconciliation is the outward face of the Mugabe government, and in many ways the degree of coexistence is remarkable. There are many revolutionary leaders who started out as jailbirds before becoming ministers with expensive limousines. But where else in the world would a man who spent 20 years behind bars come back to his old prison and find his old jailers still in charge?
God, imagine how tight their asses were when they were fucking shaking that guy's hand.
Are we ready to go? Yeah.
Maurice Nyagumbo last saw Salisbury Prison just over a year ago, when he was finally released after spending 1/3 of his life inside. Today he is Minister of Mines and is ushered politely through gates that were once firmly closed on him. Leading the way, the Director of Prisons, Alex Hall, who was responsible for guarding thousands of guerrillas in the war. Maurice Nyagumbo was one of the small elite, the dozen or so nationalist leaders who defied the Smith regime and used their time behind bars to build the political party that could make a revolution. In cell blocks like this one, some of the nationalists almost lost hope, as their imprisonment dragged on for years, sometimes decades.
This was my cell. As you're seeing, there are 3 cells at this side. That one was Prime Minister's cell, and this one was Ms. Tingala's cell. The 3 of us, would have this enclosure here as our exercise yard. And that was all for us. Well, mainly we used to play drafts, an indoor game, and what else? Cards, I think.
Did you discuss politics here, Maurice?
Oh yes, of course, we did discuss politics, as you may imagine. We used to talk more about politics than anything else. Yes.
And did you think then that you'd ever be let out?
Oh no. To ourselves, it was, of course, we were the starters of the struggle and we were going to die before we got anything, and that's what, that was all about. You see, this is what you used to think about.
The prison routine goes on much as always, except that the convicts are criminals, not freedom fighters. For 12 years, the current Prime Minister of Zimbabwe saw the world through metal bars.
Aw, man. Saying we've detected video in your stream belonging to someone else. Your stream may be temporarily blocked. If you plan to continue, please ensure the content owner has added your channel to their allow list. That's weird. I never really got any warnings like that from this one. But, all right. Damn. Temporarily blocked, huh? Let's see. Yeah, just call their bluff. Oh, that's so stupid. All right. Yeah. Oy vey, shut it down. The stream ended. All right, let me try ending and restarting it.